He came from poverty and illness in India and was declared the new Messiah, groomed to bring salvation to the world. As a boy, he became the symbol of a new spiritual movement and spoke to those weary of social strife, religious dogma, and materialism. But as a man, Jiddu Krishnamurti defied the expectations of those around him. And when he found his own voice, he didn't offer salvation.
What we are trying in all these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind. Not accept things as they are, but to understand it, to go into it, to examine it, give your heart and your mind with everything that you have to find out a way of living differently.
He was a towering figure on the platform, and with audiences, sometimes as though they were hypnotized by him, absorbed in what he was saying.
But that depends on you and not somebody else. Because in this there is no teacher, no pupil, there is no leader.
He's talking about something you do yourself on your own, and everybody kept looking at him as a messiah or a world teacher, somebody who would save them.
He wanted people to wake up to the reality of something and not simply have faith and trust that some outside entity was going to provide the answers.
To the crowds who had come to him looking for salvation, he offered both less and more. The Adyar River winds its way through southern India. At the turn of the century, wildlife teemed its banks and small villages dotted its shores. One of the largest of these towns, named after the river itself, was where Jiddu Krishnamurti spent part of his childhood. His father had moved his family to Adyar after the death of Krishnamurti's mother. Here he found a small house to raise his 4 sons and work with a religious organization he had joined, the Theosophical Society. As a young boy, Krishnamurti played along the banks of the river in the shadow of the imposing Theosophical headquarters. The Theosophical Society, a spiritual movement founded by Westerners, promoted universal brotherhood and explored ancient religious traditions. They had selected Adyar as their home.
For people who were brought up in the West, India becomes seen as a new holy land. For a spiritual seeker, India is sort of a gold mine.
Theosophy was an attempt to bring an amalgam of the great religious, spiritual teachings of the world together and offer them in a palatable form.
Who's interested in it? Everybody, almost, on some vague level. Secret wisdom is very attractive to most people, at least on a superficial level.
It mainly attracted people, I think, who are willing to think outside the box, okay, to think unconventionally, definitely.
Annie Besant, the president of the Theosophical Society, was particularly drawn to mystical elements of the movement. She and other theosophists became convinced that a Messiah, a world teacher, would come from the East, possibly from India, to lead humanity to enlightenment. Walking along the river in Adyar one day, Charles Leadbeater, a colleague of Besant's, happened upon a group of boys playing along the shore. One of these boys was 14-year-old Jiddu Krishnamurti. To the casual observer, nothing about the boy appeared remarkable.
Leadbeater saw a scrawny, malnourished young boy who had crooked teeth, lice in his eyebrows, who was not very strong or healthy. He looked a typical South Indian Brahmin boy.
Leadbeater was a controversial figure. He'd been brought up on charges of immoral conduct in England, and though he was never convicted, many theosophists doubted his character. Despite this, Annie Besant trusted and relied on Leadbeater, and she defended his innocence. She also thought him to be clairvoyant, able to see the atmosphere that surrounded a person. This aura, they both believed, could reveal the purity of a person's soul.
Mr. Leadbeater said that child has the purest aura.
An aura that was very beautiful.
Most innocent aura that he'd ever seen.
This caused him to identify this boy as being someone extraordinary.
That should be taken and nurtured. That's what started this whole story.
From this brief encounter, Leadbeater declared Krishnamurti to be the one and told Theosophists to prepare for the coming of the Lord. Theosophists believed this unlikely 14-year-old would lead the world towards peace and spiritual salvation. And they thought themselves to be following in the path of religious tradition and prophecy, wherein the world teacher would once again be reincarnated, as he had been in the form of the Buddha, in the form of Jesus and Muhammad.
Theosophists draw from many sources, but feel that the world teacher may well be a figure that will be independent of any one religion, will sort of combine and transcend them all.
Besant and Leadbeater contacted Krishnamurti's widowed father and sought permission to move his son onto the grounds of the Theosophical headquarters. But the boy spoke no English and was terrified of foreigners. His father and he agreed only after Krishnamurti's younger brother, Nitya, was allowed to go with him.
At the very beginning, it was simply a task of helping him to learn to sleep in a bed, to use a toothbrush, to eat with fork and spoon. So these were kind of superficial cultural things that Besant and Leadbeater thought were necessary to make him comfortable in the world.
From now on, Krishnamurti and Nitya's lives would never be the same. The boys were constantly observed and strictly controlled. Their food was carefully selected, and they were put on a regular schedule of meditation, exercise, and study.
He would have preferred to sit and look at the clouds, to watch running water, to look at flowers and insects. He did not like to study books. So his mind was not the kind of a mind that was traditionally educable.
Years later, Krishnamurti looked back on his childhood, able to reflect on those experiences. He referred to himself as K and spoke about himself in the third person.
Nobody was to touch anything that K touched. If they said they liked oranges, for the rest of the year they had oranges. If they said they wanted to go on a bicycle ride, right, you went on a bicycle ride for the rest of the year from 7 to 8. So the boys never said after that they liked anything.
After several months, Besant and Leadbeater decided that Krishnamurti was ready for the next phase of his spiritual initiation. They placed him in a room and encouraged him to enter a trance-like state. Soon, they believed, he would be contacted by what they called the Masters.
Theosophists were convinced that there were disembodied masters that spoke to people through various means, and that somehow this contained some unutterable type of wisdom not obtainable through other sources.
The immediate background of Theosophy has to be seen as the spiritualist movement of the mid-19th century. The belief that mediums could communicate messages from departed relatives and loved ones, or in some cases from higher spiritual teachers.
Besant and Leadbeater said that at some point Krishnamurti's consciousness would leave his body and a fragment of the consciousness of the world teacher would step in. In a sense, it's a kind of mediumship that they were talking about, where the host becomes unconscious and another spirit steps in.